So in part one, we covered the development of the conventional core barrel, and we left off with the development of the M series core barrel, which had the core lifter assembly located in a lifter case attached to the end of the inner barrel. And this development led a lot of engineers to start thinking, now that we have the core completely contained within the inner tube, could we remove that tube without removing the bit from the hole? And that's what led to the development of the wireline barrel. So, why use a wireline system compared to conventional? The fact of the matter is speed. Rigs intended for drilling conventional, you have to pull all of your rods out, take your bit off, and remove your core. With a wireline system, you do not need to know that. So, a lot of older rigs, you'd have big box derricks like this, and you'd pull the rods in however long of a length that you could. Standard would typically be 10-foot lengths, break down every 10-foot rod. And larger derricks could accommodate 20 and 30-foot pulls. With a wireline system, you only need a derrick tall enough to handle the longest size rod you're using. So if you're running 10-foot rods, strictly speaking, all you need is derricks that could pull your 10-foot inner barrel and the overshot. So you might get away with, say, a 15, maybe 20-foot derrick. And on deeper holes, that was a big boost to production. You're looking at going from maybe 10 to 20 feet a day to 100, maybe even 150 or 200 feet a day, depending on drilling conditions. So, by speeding up the production, it became more profitable. So, it took about 10 years for the M series to evolve into the wireline barrel. The M series was introduced in the late 1940s. The first commercially successful wireline barrel was introduced in the late 1950s by the Longyear Company. And it more or less remains unchanged to this day as the Q series, or as more of a generic term, the WL series of core barrels. And here we have a breakdown of the barrel. So the idea behind wireline barrel is your rods, they had to change. They had to be more similar to casing in that they were large diameter on the inside. And the early wireline rods were adapted from the W series of casing. Dimensionally, they're pretty close, and there were some changes made to the heat treatment in the thread. So the idea here being, you have these latching lugs here, and when you pull on your Christmas tree up here, or your spearhead, with your overshot assembly with these jaws, these lugs retract inward, allowing the inner tube assembly to be removed from the hole. And this would be removed on thin wire cable, usually 3/16, quarter of an inch, compared to 3/8, half inch being more common for actual lifting. The only weight that the wireline winch has to pull is the weight of the inner tube that's full of core, and of course the weight of its own cable. Early drills, they didn't have the provision for use of wireline equipment. So you'd have to add another set of shivs to the machine and another hoist. Some hoist could be integrated right into the machine and either run off a chain drive off of your main winch, or they could be a separate unit that would be powered by its own motor. And later on with the built-in units, they would be switched to hydraulic, and hydraulic is generally the way it's done today. The reason hydraulic wasn't used earlier was a lot of the early hydraulic systems on drills were made to run cylinders, not motors. So they simply didn't have enough flow to spin a winch fast enough. Now this is an original Longyear inner barrel back end. I don't have the inner tube attached. This is NQ size. And this is probably about 30 years old at this point. I used this daily for probably about 5 or 6 years. And here are the latching lugs. And these are pretty well wore. That's why I decided to retire this. I spent a lot of time rebuilding this and putting on replacement parts. Here we have some wireline rods and conventional rods. This is NW rod. As you can see, there's not a lot of clearance on the inside. It's got this big, coarse, probably about 3-inch long thread, I want to say. And then here we have Sprague and Henwood wireline rod. It's dimensionally identical to a Longyear rod, except the threads are different. There's a lot more clearance on the inside for that inner barrel to pass, and for the wireline winch to pass. And these rods could be used as casing. They're not as durable as W series casing, but you could fit the next size down core barrel and rods through it should you need to. You'd have to remove your core barrel, of course, but it did give a lot more options. Because Longyear invented the Q series wireline, they had a patent on it. So no other manufacturer could produce their series of wireline until that patent has expired. After expired, that became the WL series, and spoiler alert, eventually adopted as a standard. So other manufacturers start developing their own wireline systems with their own wireline rods. Sprague and Henwood came up with the F73 wireline system. I actually have an original unused bit here. For comparison's sake, here is a Longyear style bit that was produced by Sprague and Henwood. Very, very similar in overall size, but the difference here is the threads. So the Sprague system worked fairly similarly. The latch was a slightly different assembly with actually ball bearings to grab it. And from what I'm told, the Sprague system was great for having positive latch both with your retriever and your latch in your outer barrel. Christensen also introduced their own wireline system, which they called the quad latch system. And the advantage of this system was it had a much greater latching area inside the outer tube than the Sprague and Henwood or the Longyear system. And they had actually eventually developed the system into a retrofit kit that would work with Longyear bits in outer barrels and inner tube components. So you would have the advantage of the Longyear system with the latching mechanism of the Christensen system. Now here I actually have two of the Christensen systems. This is the overshot tool for grabbing the barrel. It's a cup that would grip the latches here. And this is the releasing tool, which it might be a bit difficult to see, but there's a finger in there that sits on the inside here on that pin. And this loading funnel keeps the latches closed around that until it enters the rods. After it enters the rods, the inside walls will hold it shut. And it will go down. See if I could do this one-handed. Go down, and then when it's latched into place, the latch is spread out, lock into place, and then the releasing tool could be pulled out. So this is the Christensen system here. Very strong, but finicky. It requires more labor and more patience. And then here is that Longyear barrel I had showed previously, which only had 2 latches. We have at least 3 different wireline systems that were developed at different times. And each of these, they had different rod threads. They had different bit threads and outer barrel assemblies. The only thing that was really the same was the hole diameters, because that had already been standardized with the conventional tooling and conventional core barrels. So, what happened? Longyear won the race in designing one that was commercially popular, especially since at the time, like Sprague and Hentwood, they were drilling all over the world doing mineral exploration contracts. So the long ear system eventually got adopted as a Diamond Core Drilling Manufacturers Association standard. However, long ear still has a copyright on the Q designation, so generically it's called WL. The Sprague and Henwood system kind of went the way of the dodo. It was a good system, but it was a bit finicky, and after Sprague and Henwood went out of business in the early 1990s, the only people that were really using it were former Sprague and Henwood employees, which is where I did get this bit. The Christensen system, it still survives. There is still companies making parts for it. Most of the Christensen system today is used as a conversion with the long ear style, using the same bits and outer barrels as the long ear system. And that's because it's already so popular with long ear success, in addition to the Q series from long ear being adopted as a standard as the WL series. So in conclusion, the M series core barrel led to the development of the wireline systems, just because now you had a way of retaining your core sample inside the inner tube, and all that had to be worked on at that point was how do you remove the inner tube while keeping your rods and bit at the bottom of the hole. This led to increased productivity in each shift, less wear and tear on bits, which that was found through several studies, and brought lower cost for exploration drilling, because now instead of only getting maybe 40 or 50 feet a shift, you could be getting double, triple, even quadruple that, depending on conditions and how deep you are. The deeper you go with a wireline system, the more exponential your savings become. Because the two main costs in deep diamond drilling are labor and diamonds for your bit. And while the wireline tooling was more expensive, it is now the gold standard for both exploration drilling and even geotechnical drilling as well. So I believe my next video will be on development and progress of diamond bits, unless something else comes up in that meantime. If you have any questions, comments, like to share anything new, feel free to. And I appreciate your time. Have a good one.